Before he became one of the greatest leaders in history, before he changed the fate of Rome, before he made continents tremble, he was just a child, but not an ordinary child. Fate had set its eyes on him the moment he was born. This is the unknown, dark, and epic beginning of Julius Caesar. Rome, 100 BC, the heart of turmoil. While Rome's marble temples glittered in the sun, the soul of the city was fractured. Senators were forging secret alliances, clashes broke out in the streets. The Republic was creaking under its own weight. And in the middle of all this chaos, a child was born into the noble Julian family, Gaius Julius Caesar. Though his family was respected, it was not powerful. Yet fate had already drawn a path for him. A childhood forged in danger. Growing up in the narrow streets of Rome, Caesar met the brutality of life at an early age. By the time he was 14, Sulla, the dictator who had drowned Rome in blood, declared Caesar's family enemies of the state. As soldiers searched the streets, tearing them apart to find him, the young boy was forced to flee. He could feel the breath of fate on his neck, but he did not give up. He did not bow. He hid, he struggled, he survived. When Sulla finally backed down, he uttered a prophecy. There is far too much Marius in this boy. This was not a threat. It was an acknowledgement. Sulla was the first to see the fire burning inside him. A mind shaped by the streets of Rome. At a young age, Caesar studied rhetoric, philosophy, and mathematics. But his real lessons came from the streets. He observed power. He studied human nature. He learned that leadership was an art far deeper than the sword. Yet life was preparing a far greater trial for him. When young Caesar set sail to complete his education, a disaster rose from the misty waters of the Aegean. Cilician pirates. They boarded his ship. They took Caesar prisoner. To them, Caesar was just a rich Roman. But Caesar quickly showed them who he really was. When the pirates set the ransom amount, Caesar answered with a laugh, "Only that much? I'm worth more than this. Raise my ransom." The pirates were stunned, but they listened to him because even his posture commanded them. During the days he spent as a captive, he recited poetry to the pirates, played games with them, and even ordered them to be quiet. Even as a young man, leadership was already flowing through his veins, and Caesar made a promise. "The day you release me, I will come back, and I will have you all crucified." The pirates thought he was joking, but for Caesar, this was an oath. Soon after he was freed, he gathered a fleet, put out to sea, and hunted the pirates down. He captured them one by one, and he kept the promise he had made. This moment was the first message young Caesar declared to the world. "You do not mock me. I write my own fate." The awakening of a legend. A man who escaped death in his childhood, who crushed pirates in his youth, who was forged in the streets of Rome. Very soon he would change the course of history, rewrite the destiny of empires, and his name would be spoken with respect thousands of years later. This is the beginning of Caesar's legend. When young Caesar returned to Rome, everyone was aware of him now. He was loved by the people, respected by the soldiers, and watched with fear by the Senate. Because Caesar's stride was not the stride of an ordinary politician. It was the step of a man walking toward his destiny. Caesar rose rapidly on the political stage. His power of oratory was such that when he began to speak in the Forum, even the buzz of the marketplace fell silent. The crowds were drawn to him, because when Caesar spoke, the poor of Rome saw themselves. The ordinary citizens of Rome felt their voices being heard, and the future of Rome seemed to be reshaped in his eyes. This power made the Roman elites tremble, but Caesar was only getting started. Even among the most powerful men of Rome, the charisma of young Caesar was now being whispered about. Pompeius, Rome's great general, and Crassus, the richest man in Rome, were both aware of Caesar's rise. When the three came together, the very body of Roman politics cracked. This alliance went down in history as the first triumvirate. Caesar's goal was clear: to hold real power in Rome and to write his fate freely. Caesar passed laws that helped ordinary Romans. He distributed land to the poor, granted rights to soldiers, and declared war on corruption. He was now the hero of the people. The crowd shouted his name. This support terrified the ruling class of Rome. Because there had always been one truth in Roman history: a man loved by the people cannot be stopped. The Senate, wanting to keep Caesar away from Rome, appointed him governor of Gaul. On paper, it was an office. In reality, it was exile. But Caesar did not see it as exile. He saw it as an opportunity. Gaul, wild lands beyond Rome's borders, brave tribes, great wars, and a stage with the potential to change the course of history. As Caesar left Rome, he knew one thing: the real power would be born there. The victories he would win in Gaul would make him not just a leader, but a legend. And as Caesar set foot in Gaul, Rome trembled ever so slightly, because everyone knew a storm was coming. Caesar was no longer an ordinary statesman. He was no longer just a rising star in Rome. He was the man who would change Rome's destiny. The wars that would begin in Gaul would show his power to the entire world. And in the end, the path that would lead Rome into civil war, to the Rubicon, and to the birth of the imperial age was beginning right here. This was not just the rise of a leader, it was the birth of an empire. The lands of Gaul, beyond the borders of Rome, a world ruled by wild winds and fearless warriors. And when Caesar came here, Rome would never be the same again. The Gallic tribes looked from the outside like a scattered people constantly fighting each other. But Caesar saw the potential within them. If they ever united, they could become a deadly threat to Rome. So first he struck fast. He defeated the tribes one by one. The Roman legions advanced through Gaul like a storm of steel. But at the heart of Gaul there was not fear, but anger. And that anger gathered around one man, Vercingetorix. Vercingetorix, the Lion of Gaul young, charismatic, ruthless, a leader who united the tribes under a single banner. Across Gaul, Caesar's name was heard, but the name of Vercingetorix became the voice of resistance. The spark became a blaze. Gaul was united now, and in that moment, everyone understood. This would not be an ordinary war. This was a clash of two geniuses. Caesar's genius moves in action. Caesar went beyond classical warfare. He trained his legions according to the harsh local climate, launched surprise raids, altered the flow of rivers, and led hidden marches through the forests. For him, Gaul was not a battlefield. It was a chessboard. With every move, he tightened the noose around Vercingetorix. But the Gallic leader did not give up. To halt Caesar's advance, he turned to scorched earth tactics. Fields were burned, granaries emptied, and the Roman army was to be condemned to hunger. It was a lethal strategy, but Caesar did not break. He would not break. Alesia, one of the greatest sieges in history. And then the day came. Gaul's fate would be decided at Alesia. Vercingetorix withdrew with his army to the hilltop stronghold of Alesia. Outside, hundreds of thousands of Gallic warriors were marching to rescue them. Caesar then made one of the craziest decisions in history: to besiege the enemy from both inside and outside. At the same time, in the same battle, the legions built kilometers of fortifications around the city. Ditches, walls, towers, traps. They constructed not just a fortress, but a ring of iron, a steel labyrinth. Rome's engineering power collided with Gaul's fire for war. The massive Gallic relief army attacked from the outside. Vercingetorix struck from within. Rome was being crushed from two sides, but Caesar did not retreat. He stood on his ramparts, commanding his legions as they surged in waves. In that moment, fate hung suspended over Rome. And then, Rome held. Gaul broke. Vercingetorix surrendered. Caesar had won one of the greatest victories in history. After Alesia, the world knew this. Caesar was not just a commander. He was one of the greatest military minds history had ever seen. Gaul was now Rome, and Rome was now in the palm of Caesar's hand. And this victory would make him too powerful to remove, because very soon, Caesar would not only be the conqueror of Gaul, he would become the fate of Rome itself. When the Gallic Wars came to an end, Caesar was no longer just a general. He was the most loved, the most talked about, and the most feared man in Rome. But the great victories in Gaul awakened his enemies in Rome. And so, one of history's darkest and most inevitable conflicts began to draw near. Rome's elites could no longer hide the power Caesar had gained through his victories. Pompey, the great general who had once been his ally, now stood in Caesar's shadow. The pride of the Senate was shattered, and at last a decision was made. Caesar will disband his army and return to Rome alone. To accept this would mean the end of Caesar, because in Rome, power never forgave those who laid down their sword. Two paths lay before Caesar: to submit or to change the course of history. In 49 BC, a small river that marked the borders of Rome became the stage for the fate of the world. The Rubicon. Caesar sat on his horse at the riverbank. His soldiers stood behind him. The future of Rome stood before him. If he crossed the river, it would be a declaration of war against Rome. There would be no turning back, no forgiveness, only victory or death. And in that moment, Caesar spoke one of the most famous lines in history: Alea iacta est. The die is cast. He urged his horse into the water. His legions followed. The march on Rome had begun. In that moment, the world would never be the same again. Pompey and the Senate fled Rome in haste because the people were on Caesar's side. They greeted his entry into Rome like a triumphal procession. But the war was only just beginning. Italy, Greece, Macedonia, Africa. The Roman Civil War spread across the known world. Pompey was a great general, but Caesar was a storm. At Pharsalus, the two faced each other at the head of one of the greatest armies history had ever seen. Caesar's military genius crushed Pompey's numerical superiority. The fate of Rome changed that day. Pompey fled, but there was no fleeing from Caesar's destiny. Rome was now listening to the footsteps of one man. When Caesar returned to Rome in triumph, the people greeted him as a hero, and the Senate received him like a sovereign. But this victory had a price, because Caesar was now no longer just a leader. He was the most powerful man in Rome, and that power would soon give birth to an empire, but it would also drag him into the shadow of betrayal. The Civil War was over, but the true storm, the dark clouds that would bring Caesar's death, had already begun to gather on the horizon. When the Civil War ended, the streets of Rome still smelled of smoke. The heart of the Republic was broken, the state exhausted by years of conflict. But out of that darkness, a leader emerged who was ready to build a new Rome: Gaius Julius Caesar. This time, he would not fight with swords on the battlefield, but with laws, reforms, and reason. The man who rebuilt Rome. The moment Caesar returned to Rome, he went to work. To heal the wounds of civil war, he took unprecedented steps. He gave breathing room to a people crushed under debt. He called back thousands who had been exiled. He expanded the Senate and cleaned out corruption. He granted all the rights he had promised to his soldiers. He launched massive construction projects to reduce unemployment. He broadened citizenship rights across all of Italy. For the first time in many years, Rome could feel the justice of a leader, and the people called him by a single title: Pater Patriae, Father of the Fatherland. The peak of power, Caesar's unstoppable rise. As his reforms reshaped Rome, Caesar himself grew even greater. He was no longer just a general. He was a statesman, a reformer, a visionary. He even changed Rome's calendar. The month we now know as July bears his name, Julius. The city was growing, the empire was expanding, and Caesar's name echoed in every corner of Rome. But this rise did not mean hope for everyone. In the dark chambers of the Senate, the whispers began to multiply. This man is too powerful. Is the Republic coming to an end? Is Caesar walking toward a kingship? Rome was a people who hated kings, and the idea of one man becoming too powerful filled them with dread. Caesar did not intend to be a king, but power followed him like a shadow. With his victories, reforms, and the love of the people, Caesar had ascended to the very summit of Rome. But the summit is lonely, it is cold, and it is where enemies multiply the most. Senators, aristocrats, old rivals, they all united around a single fear. If Caesar cannot be stopped, the Republic will die. And fear always drives people toward the darkest decisions. A plan was taking root. An idea that began as a tiny spark would soon set Rome's fate on fire. Caesar was building the future of Rome. But there was one thing he did not know. Fate had already prepared one final scene for him. And on that stage, the line between friend and enemy would be written in blood. In the heart of Rome, there is a thin line between power and betrayal. And that line would vanish in March of 44 BC. The corridors of the Senate had become more dangerous than any battlefield. At night, in dimly lit rooms, the same sentence was whispered again and again. Caesar has become too powerful. His reforms had saved Rome, but his successes had become a crime in the eyes of his enemies. Jealousy, fear, ambition, all of them came together, and a decision was made. Caesar would die. And within this plan was the name that cuts deeper than any blade. Brutus, the man Caesar had once trusted, once loved like a son. Day, March 15th, 44 BC, the Ides of March. In the morning, Caesar's house was silent. His wife Calpurnia begged him not to go out that day. She had seen terrible dreams. But Caesar laughed. He was the leader of Rome. Fear had no place in his vocabulary. He put on his toga, and for the last time, stepped out into the streets of Rome. Fate was already waiting for him. The Senate house, the shadow of death. When Caesar entered, the stage was already set. The senators greeted him in a circle. They were supposedly there to present a petition, but that circle was a trap. Suddenly, the first blade struck, then another, and another. Caesar was stunned, not enraged. He simply looked into the face of betrayal, and through the crowd he saw a face half hidden by a toga. Brutus. Caesar's voice was a low but clear whisper. "You too, Brutus. It too, Brute." In that moment, his resistance broke, because the knife of an enemy kills the body, but the knife of a friend shatters the soul. Caesar fell to his knees, and before the statue of Pompey, he drew his last breath. It was as if fate had laid Rome's new god at the feet of its old heroes. That day, Caesar died. But with his death, not only a leader fell, an entire era came to an end. Crowds wept in the streets. To the people, he was a hero. To some, a tyrant. But to everyone, he was an immortal figure. His death plunged Rome into chaos. But at the same time, it opened the gates of a new empire. Because when Caesar's blood touched the ground, something happened that no other leader in history ever truly achieved. People began to believe he was a god. And soon after, the man who would become Rome's first emperor, Augustus, founded his dynasty with these words, "I am the son of the divine Julius." Caesar died, but his name rose from among mortals and was written among the gods. The death of Julius Caesar was like a dagger driven into the heart of Rome. That day, not only did a leader die, an era closed, a world came to an end. But there are some people who, even when their mortal bodies vanish, continue to bend the flow of the world. Caesar was one of them. When Caesar died, Rome raised him to the level of a god. Temples were built, festivals were held, stars were dedicated in his name. At night, when Romans looked up at the sky, they would point to a shining star and say, "There, that is Julius Caesar. He has become immortal." Those who killed him faded from history, but Caesar's name became the symbol of power, intelligence, and unwavering will.